Since the written pattern for round 3 looks a bit more complicated, I'm gonna walk through it with you, but don't worry, you actually know everything you need to know to be able to crochet round 3. So first I want to show you how we should properly use the stitch marker. So when we first started crocheting, I had told you to put the hook into the same hole that's marked by the stitch marker. You actually don't normally want to do that because you might accidentally keep stretching out this hole. So it's better to take the stitch marker out before you start crocheting into that hole. So on that note, let's take a real good look at where the stitch marker is. Make sure we see the V that it's under, because that's exactly where we want to put our hook under as well. Then we're going to take the stitch marker out, put it off to the side, and put our hook in exactly the same spot that the stitch marker was in. And the first stitch of round 3 is an increase stitch, abbreviated INC. And remember, that is actually 2 single crochet stitches in the same hole. So we're gonna start the first single crochet stitch. So once you put your hook in the hole, it should look like you've got 3 loops on your hook. Then you yarn over by bringing the working yarn from the back to the front of your hook over the top of it. Then we're gonna pull that yarn through just the V, so that we're left with 2 loops on the hook. And then we're going to yarn over again and pull that yarn through both loops on the hook. So we've completed the first half of that first increased stitch. And before we move on, we're going to put that stitch marker back in place because we've now completed the first stitch of round 3 and we don't want to forget that. So grab the stitch marker, look for the V that you just made, and put that stitch marker under that V. Great. Now, to finish the increased stitch, we're going to put a single crochet stitch in the same hole. And if you have trouble seeing that hole just from looking, you can always do the tugging method where you hold on to the stitch you just made, tug it around, see what hole moves. The hole that moves is the one you put your hook into. Do another single crochet stitch. So remember, that is yarning over, bringing that yarn through just the V, so you're left with 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over again and pull it through both loops on the hook. Hooray! So you've done the increase stitch, the first increase stitch of round 3. So now the pattern says 4SC. That means you're going to do a single crochet stitch in the next 4 V's. So we stick our hook under the next completely available V. In case you couldn't see that easily, you can always do the tugging method. See the hole that moves? Since we're now going to put a stitch in the next hole, we don't want to put our hook in the hole that moved. We want to put it in the hole next to it. All right, so here we have 3 loops on our hook again. Yarn over, bring the yarn through just the V, so you're left with 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over again and bring it through both loops on the hook. That was single crochet stitch number 1. And now we're gonna put a single crochet stitch in the next hole. I'm gonna go a little bit faster since the purpose of this video is more to teach you how you follow along the pattern. Now we're gonna do the 3rd single crochet stitch and the 4th single crochet stitch. Okay, now you have reached the part of the pattern that says INC times 2. That means you're going to do an increase stitch in the next 2 stitches. So in the next 2 holes. So here we're going to do the first half of the increase stitch. And then we need to put a single crochet stitch in the same hole to turn this into an increase stitch. So we can always use the tugging method to see what hole moves. And then stick our hook in that hole and do a single crochet stitch. That was the first of the 2 increase stitches. Now we're gonna do a second increase stitch in the following hole. So that's the first half of the increase stitch, and this is the second half. So now you get the pattern. I'll just finish this round with you and then count the number of V's with you. So we're back to doing 4 single crochet stitches, 1 single crochet stitch, in each of the next holes, and we're gonna end round 3 by doing an increase stitch in the last hole. Whoops. And you don't wanna get the stitch marker stuck in there like I just did. We're gonna do that again. Here we go. And that is the last increase stitch. So another good practice to get in the habit of is taking your hook out of your piece every time you think you've finished a row. So remember, that's just pulling your hook really far out so that the loop your hook goes into becomes real big, just in case you accidentally tug on the yarn. Don't want to lose your work. And the parentheses, the number in the parentheses at the end of each line in the pattern tells you how many V's you should have by the end of the round. So I think I've finished the round, and I think I've done it correctly. And I think that because of 2 things. One, I was counting in my head. And you know, as I was doing 4 single crochet stitches or 2 increase stitches, everything lined up perfectly. And when I hit the end of the round, the last stitch I made was in the hole immediately next to the one marked by the stitch marker, which is great because it means my last stitch wound up right before the very first stitch of the round, which is what I want. But just to double check, because who knows, maybe I got distracted, didn't count things correctly, put stuff in the wrong holes. I'm just gonna count. So we're gonna count starting from the stitch marked by the stitch marker, because we know for sure that that is stitch number 1. And we make our way around the rim of the piece. So this is stitch number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Remember that the loop that your hook goes into does not count as a stitch. So success, I have 16 stitches in round 3.